My name is Mujib. So I'm supposed to present with Professor Chakravarti, and she's on the way, so she couldn't make it on time. So the title of the presentation is Gold Standard in Household Economy, a qualitative study of gold consumption in Malabar. So this is part of my larger PhD project where I'm looking at the patterns of accumulations, especially patterns of capital accumulations among pious Muslim entrepreneurs who belong to the Malabar region of Kerala. I hope at least some of you are familiar with this particular region, which has a different cultural and political history, and its linkages with the Islamic history, and also the Islam came to this particular region at the time of Prophet Muhammad, and the trade relations, and much has been talked about the sort of the cultural history and the specificities of this particular region throughout the literature. So I'm not getting into that. So particularly I'm looking at the gold culture among the Muslims in Malabar region. So this was one of the quotations I found very interesting when I was interviewing Mr. Nishad, one of the directors of Malabar Gold and Diamond. And I asked him whether Malayali's interest in gold was diminishing, and he's like, absolutely not, because it's a gift article that you present to your mother, sister, partner, friend, or daughter. And he says, its values keep going up every day, because a gift is constantly in demand as long as there is a love. So which itself shows the Malayali's affinity towards gold, and that has been sort of over there in the news like for a long time. And this chapter is going to be also part of a book, which is a forthcoming book under the Cambridge University Press, edited by Dr. Chakravarti and Dr. Barbara Harris-White. And these are some of the interesting statistics which we found from World Gold Council report. And if you look at it, you can see just the Malayalis, which just 2.7% of the whole country's population, consumes 14% of the whole gold. And also some of the other interesting statistics says that if you look at the monthly per capita consumptions, you can see both in the rural India and also urban India, Kerala leads. And you can see the second rank and also the third position, and you can see the differences within that. And this is also another interesting statistics where they look at the different brides in India and the amount of gold they come up with. And again, Kerala bride sort of leads, and the least, the bride with least amount of gold comes from Gujarat according to the statistics. So this all shows that affinity, of Malayali's affinity towards the gold, despite having a different, sort of HDI index and so on and so forth. So what we are going to do that, so I'm going to sort of introduce you guys to the, the gold culture in Malabar. And in order to understand the significance of, the gold, among Muslims in Malabar, you have to understand the substantive economy of Malabar and how does that work. And we also take you to the idea of gold standard. The idea is still sort of, there among the community living over there. Then we'll take you through the different ceremonial, functions through which, they accumulate a lot of gold. Then we will look at the transformations of gold, which they accumulated through these different events. Then we will sort of theorize, try to theorize the whole culture, among Muslims in this particular region with the help of relational and reproductive saving, a theory by Isabel Garin and her colleagues. So, if you look at the gold culture among Muslims in Malabar, it's like anywhere else, it's part of their aesthetics, but more than that, beyond that, it's more of connected to the realm of finance and investment, and also economic security, family linkage, the concept of self, and modes of belongings and other. And much beyond that, why gold is very interesting at this particular region, because how religion sort of regulate and help to circulate gold and also to restrict gold. So we are sort of looking at it in detail, how religion intervene, in the whole gold market. So basically, we are looking at the material forms and economic values of gold, and the way in which these relate to the changes in kinship, gender relations, and capital accumulations. So, before we get into the significance of gold, among the community living over here, you have to understand, the substantive economy of Malabar and how does that work. So, drawing on Karl Polanyi, substantive economy gives a lot of emphasis to the reciprocity, redistribution, and household. So, they consider household as the unit of consumption rather than the individual rational individual consumer as the unit of consumptions. And the substantive economy views the economy as a compilation of interpersonal ties as well as the relationship that exists between persons and the environment in which they live. So the particular the cultural context has a lot of influence in the consumption pattern of people who belong to this particular region. So how does that economy, substantive economy, which is more of like influenced by religious doctrines, influenced gold regulations? I'll give you one example. So as part of our research, we also did some archival research. So archive here means we looked at some of the archives of fatwas. I hope some of you know what is fatwa is. Fatwa is like a legal opinion on anything. So there can be legal opinion on rituals, different practices, economics, and also opinion on daily practices. So we particularly looked at a set of fatwas which is on gold and connected to the gold. And there was this interesting story where this lady come to the mufti and says, I want your help to get my gold back from my husband. So she's saying she's 55-year-old and she's planning to go to Mecca for the Hajj pilgrimage. For that, she needs a lot of money. So she's saying at the time of marriage, she was given this particular amount of gold, which was later under the custody of her husband, promising that he will give it her back when she needs it. And she says the Qazi that, see, I'm 55-year-old, I wish go to Makkah and I don't have money right now, but I own a lot of money which is under the custody of my husband. So I want your help to get it back. So interestingly, this sort of the whole document, legal document, shows how Mufti intervened in the whole case and helped her to get that money, the gold back from her husband, to help her sort of go to the Mecca. So which itself shows how the social interactions and which is formed through the larger structural influences and power relation sort of help to regulate the transactions of gold within this particular substantive economic system. We'll give more examples and you will get more clarity on that. And this is one of the interesting aspects if you sort of try to understand the substantive economy of Malabar. So we talked about this idea of gold standard, the idea which we had long back. We talk about creating currencies and pegging that with the gold. So, but if you look at the legal doctrines within Islam and particularly produced within this particular region, they talk about the significance of gold, which has a quasi-sacred status as the foundation of Muslim economic law. How? It is in the form of either zakat and riba. So I hope some of you know the terminology zakat, which is like a voluntary tax payment which happens once in a year. So if you possess this much wealth in different forms, then you have to pay this particular percentage. And how does that happen in this particular region? Again, social censor and social institutions, all these religious bodies intervene. This particular way of working it. But what I'm looking at, basically, if you look at the legal doctrine, they're saying that if zakat should be paid on two things. One is on naqad and second one is on arad. The naqad means cash, literally means cash, and arad means goods. So what is cash? Is naqad in Quran, it's like the gold and silver. So gold dinar and silver dirhams. They're saying if you have 20 misqal dinar, which means misqal is like a measurement in Arab, during that time. So it says if you have 20 misqal dinar, which is equivalent to 85 grams of gold, you have to pay 2.5% of it, right? So accordingly, Muslims in this particular region who possess gold in forms of ornaments or coins or whatsoever, they have to pay 2.5% of that in the form of zakat. It voluntarily happens, but you have to look. There are exceptions for that, because if they're all in the modes of ornaments and if you're sort of using it in your daily life, then you don't need to pay zakat on that. But if you keep it as a saving, then after a year you have to pay zakat on that. That's not the point here. So you have to look at then what happens to the and they do pay zakat on gold. But the interesting question is, what if you have a lot of currencies, if a lot of cash in the form of currency and digital money and so on and so forth? Then do you need to pay zakat on that or not? So the majority of muftis or the legal doctrine says that you have to pay zakat on currency as well, because the legal doctrine says if you have 20 misqal dinar, you have to pay zakat. Didn't say if you have 20 misqal gold. So there is they also considered the gold, its intrinsic value. Obviously they have considered. They've also considered the use value of it. That's why they've mentioned it dinar, right? So what happens? So people have a lot of wealth in the form of cash. cash and currencies and digital forms. So they peg that with the amount of gold. So the rate of gold every year become very crucial for these entrepreneurs and also the Muslims to sort of understand in order to sort of calculate the amount of zakat they have to pay after a year. So how gold and its sort of changing rates become so important for them sort of clears here. And also it interestingly also sort of changes, from region to region. From one country it could be a different rate, it could be a different rate in another country. So the zakat rate also sort of becomes so different. And more interestingly, and there is also zakat on goods. So for example, if you're running a shop, you have a lot of goods, you have to pay zakat on that. How do they pay that? Again, they have to peg, the whole, like the goods, you have to sort of convert that into a currency, then, peg that with the gold and see sort of, you have to pay the 2.5% of that. So it all shows that, how it becomes the solid and the sort of foundation of the modern economic law. So sorry, this is a standard economic law among the Muslims in Malabar. And also you have to understand the idea of riba, which means interest. So there's much been talked about, idea of interest and how they become, Muslim entrepreneurs sort of become disinterested in modern banking financial systems. So there's much been talked about it. So one of the phenomena we encountered in our field that many of them are investing in the form of gold. The saving in the form of gold and investing in the form of gold. How does that happen? We'll come to that. So as a methodology, we did field work. We did interview with both male and female members. We also interviewed alims who are expert in the Islamic law. We also sort of studied fatwas and Shafi legal doctrines and so on and so forth. So before we come to the sort of the distribution and redistribution of the gold in the substantive economy of Malabar, you have to understand what are some of the ceremonial sort of transactions happens through which they accumulate gold. So this is one of the cases. So you must have heard the idea of mahar, which happens through the nikah, the marriage contract. So interestingly, nowhere in the legal doctrine is mentioned that it has to be in the form of gold. But in Kerala, it's like completely in the form of gold. If exceptions happens, for example, if exceptions happens, it always comes in the newspaper. So recently there was this case of this minister who belonged to the first Pinarayi government who gave mahar in the form of a book, and it became a news head because it's never happened in any forms other than gold ornaments. So and they have also set a mahar misl, which is according to the law there should be a standard mahar which you should pay according to the status of the braid, according to the economic status of the braid, and that also sort of decide the amount of gold you're supposed to pay at the time of nikah. I'm going sort of running through it because of the lack of time. And there is also the case of hiba, which means a lot of gift they accumulate at the time of marriage, which obviously can be categorized as dowry, but we are particularly looking at it from the legal doctrines perspective, Islamic legal doctrines perspective, how they are categorizing it. So they are categorizing it as hiba, gift. That's why in the earlier case we mentioned, she sort of, the husband has to pay back, the whole amount of gold to her because it was a gift given to her and she possessed that. So from a legal doctrines perspective, they're looking at who is the donee and it should be under the donee's position. So they owns it. So these legal doctrines and social institutions and the religious bodies sort of decide who owns, who can transact, and that's how they regulate it. So, and in another case, we found that, one of the cases, one of the other legal, fatwa, we found that there was this lady who got divorced, then she got a lot of amount of gold, she got it back, then she was told to pay zakat on that because it has to be under her position, but it was under her husband's custody for a long time, but she got it back after the divorce. Now she has to pay zakat on that. And now you're looking at what happens to the gold which has been accumulated through nikah and hiba and other forms, and what are the kind of transformations happen to the gold accumulated in the context of Malabar. One of the interesting aspects we found during our interview that there was this lady we met and she was talking to us and she was completely very much was affected by the flood which happened in Kerala 2018 and 19, right? But one of the interesting thing which is still missing, not a lot of other things, what she's really missing her Kanak book, which is an account book which she keeps, where she sort of mentioned all the kinds of transactions she made in the form of gold and also in the form of cash, which itself shows that sort of circulation of gold, through ceremonial transaction. It's not simply sort of accumulated in one particular space, but it's always on a circulations. And another interesting aspect in the transformation we found when it comes to the housing. For example, there much been studied about the importance of house for Malayalis, right? We found that in many cases, the gold which they accumulated in the form of mahar and dowry has been transformed in the form of houses. Why? Because obviously it has been initially funded by the gold which she possesses. And it has also another element which is like the Islamic inheritance practice, where especially if you don't have sons, if you only have daughters, there is this possibility that your husband's siblings or agnate might also inherit your property. So they always make it, under her name, and it can also be because that she was the one who actually helped him to sort of pool capital initially at the time of building their houses. And there was also this case we found, some of these women, ladies are actually, they have at least partially or full ownership of the businesses because they were the initial, there was sort of pool capital initially when they began their business. And much beyond that, more interesting is an investment aspect of it. So we found that there was this, newspaper headline in one of the newspaper, and they're saying that there's an halal business, you invest 10 pounds of gold, which means 10 servants of gold, will give you an interesting returns. Why it is interesting for Muslim, pious Muslim entrepreneurs? Because these, for example, this particular business group knows that, people have a lot of gold, right? And they're actually ready to sort of pool that gold into the market, but they have less options for that. So what they did, so instead of encashing your gold and investing that in the form of money, they're giving them that option of, investing the gold in the form of gold itself. Then what happens? If you want to sort of withdraw your capital after a particular time period, then you can withdraw the amount of gold in the form of gold, not in the form of cash. So which becomes very appealing for this, people who live this particular space, and that becomes a mode of sort of, pooling capital in different businesses sort of popped up in this particular region. And then comes the gendered aspect of it. So the Muslims, men are sort of completely prohibited from wearing gold and also silk. So what happens, men sort of accumulate gold in the form of gold coins and also other different forms. So it gives you that sort of, that gendered sort of differentiation when it comes to the regulation of gold among the Muslim community. Then comes the idea of credit practices, especially among, female members. How do they sort of transact and circulate gold in the form of kada? So, and for us, for being a sociology PhD student, why interesting for me is because we look at the exchange aspect of it. Because when you, what happens when you exchange a gold, for example, for any other things, there should be some, it should be like, drawing from a well-known scholar, we say that elite moral sphere of exchange. You don't simply exchange gold for simple things, but you exchange it for something which comes under the same moral realm of gold. It should be exchanged either for investment or land, housing, education, prestation, counter prestations, and so on and so forth. And this is due to the sort of the cultural taboos and also associated with the society's sort of moral understanding of how should gold be used in that particular system. So by concluding the whole sort of culture we encountered in this particular region, we sort of try to theorize the whole gold culture in Malabar with the help of relational and reproductive saving. So what happens that, according to this particular theoretical framework, they look at the substantive economy as a complex sort of combination of interrelationship, and it contributes a lot into the social reproduction of household and natal and also affinal ties. And also relational saving also has its own relationship to this particular space. For example, this particular economic system work, within that particular region and also the cultural space. So it is not deterritorialized like modern banking system, but it is rooted in specific places tied to the social maintenance of the group to which it belongs. And this does not rule out the logic of accumulation, individual calculations, and market exchanges, but subject to the institutional limitations of social reproductions. So the concluding remarks, we look at this particular region, look at household as the unit of consumptions, and how does that sort of connect with the idea of kinship, capital accumulations, and gender practices, and so on and so forth. And we saw that saving and exchange take place through certain forms of mediation, ceremonial transactions, which which are essential element for establishing or maintaining social and emotional relationship. The many leaves of gold jewelry demonstrate the protein potential of gold culture in Malabar, a quasi-currency that can be pawned for loans, a gift at the time of marriage and other life cycle ceremonies, a form of capital when a household is a unit of production, and a safe form of saving and investment used as a hedge against risk. So I'm just concluding here and open for questions.
Thank you, Mujib. So if I were, you made an interesting observation towards the end where you said the modern banking system deterritorializes finance and wealth from emotions, and this particular system keeps it together.
Yeah. And it's very contextual in that sense.
In that sense, it's very contextual.
Because the regulatory bodies that works in that particular region, which are the social institutions.
From your field work, the sense that you get is that this particular linkage between gold as an asset and the emotions are very, very close still and continue to be so, at least in this part of the country.
Yes.
Okay. Sir, chota question.
Chota question, but it's okay. Very simple. I understand the significance of gold in the community. You presented it well. Have you ever looked at the impact of digital gold instead of physical gold, using the same sentiment that you've expressed?
I think, so we haven't particularly looked at it, but there is this lack of sort of awareness about digital gold. So there need to be more, literacy, among the community about how can you use digital gold and so on, so which is not at all there. So
you don't expect a Malabar to do the lead because they're in the business of physical.
Yes, they should.